The matriarch said, "We don't speak of the twins. And now I know why they were gone before I was born, but the room they shared was always locked from the outside. For years I thought that was normal, a relic of the past, something that came with old houses and older families, the kind of silence that hangs in the air like dust in the rafters. But in a town like Corrimere, where the streets remember more than the people do, some doors stay shut not out of habit but fear. Corrimere is a slate, grey town on the western coast of Yorkshire, perched on the crumbling cliffs of the North Sea. It's the kind of place where every building leans slightly from the wind and every shop still closes at 5. The cemetery is larger than the town square. Most families here have never left, and among them, none were more rooted or more quietly dreaded than the Delmars. My grandmother, Eleanor Delmar, was once the de facto matriarch of Corrimere. She didn't hold a title, and yet no church bell rang without her approval. No harvest festival occurred unless she arranged it. She had 6 children, 5 who lived and 2 we were not allowed to mention. The twins, a boy and a girl. In the Delmar house, their names were forbidden. The first time I ever heard them spoken aloud, I was 11. My cousin Peter whispered them in the dark at a sleepover, daring the words past his lips like they might burn him. Imogen and Jacob, he said, born in 68, gone by 78, no one knows where. At the time, I thought it was just another ghost story, something to scare the younger kids. But now, having spent the last year digging into sealed reports, talking to surviving witnesses, and revisiting that house for the first time in decades, I've come to understand something horrifying. The Delmars didn't lose the twins, they gave them away. And what's worse, they weren't the only ones. The Delmar estate sits at the edge of a coastal hill, past the ruined stables and frostbitten hedgerows. Even now it smells of coal fires and cold iron. My mother called it the end house, though no one in Corrimere ever did, not publicly. A photograph dated January 3, 1971, shows Imogen and Jacob on the front steps, standing side by side in matching navy coats. They were 3 years old. In the image, Eleanor stands behind them, her hands resting lightly on each child's shoulder. Her eyes, though, are fixed on something outside the frame. That photograph was the last public record of the twins. Local school records show they were enrolled at St. Braith's infant school in autumn of 73 but were withdrawn without transfer in the spring of 75. The listed reason: home education, family relocation, but they never left Corrimere. At least no one saw them do so. Helen Claybrook, a retired teacher now in her 80s, told me she remembers Eleanor coming to the school personally. She told us it wasn't a good environment for them, Helen said. Imogen spoke oddly, and Jacob wouldn't speak at all. She claimed they'd do better learning alone. I asked her what she meant by oddly. Helen hesitated. It wasn't English, she said. And it wasn't nonsense either. It was rhythmic, like chanting. Almost musical. A private language, maybe. Twins do that sometimes. But the sounds they made... She trailed off, staring out her window. I don't think they invented it. Corrimere's folklore is dense, like its fog. People say the land was never really meant to be settled, that the cliffs swallow more than they give. The library has a single locked case of folklore records, scraps of journals from the 1800s, warnings written in the margins of sermon notes, one penned by a Reverend Lionel Blackthorne in 1879. References: tween of children found speaking in the staves of forgotten tongues, born not of woman, but summoned by the hill folks' rites. Most locals dismiss the writings as fevered superstition, relics of a time when the church doubled as a watchtower. But every few decades, there are rumors, disappearances, unmarked graves in the moorland, and always the same whisper from the older generations: we don't speak of the twins. I interviewed Father Malcolm Price, the former vicar at St. Michael's, who served from 1969 until his retirement in 2004. When I asked about the Delmar twins, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "They were at my church for 2 Christmases, never any other service. Came for the carols, the nativity. Their mother sat at the very back, always watching the door. The girls sang, but not the words we sang, not even Latin." It chilled the sacristan. I showed him a page from Eleanor's 1976 diary, one of the few surviving volumes. In it she writes, "Jacob refuses food again, says the lady told him we're not real. Imogen speaks when he sleeps. The room fills with wet-moss smell. They know more than I do. I am their vessel, not their mother." The Father Price closed the diary and handed it back. I believe she meant that literally, he said. In late 1977, Corrimere experienced a string of events that are still poorly understood. Over the course of 6 weeks, 5 children under the age of 10 went missing. No bodies were ever found. Police conducted full searches of the moors, the mines, and the caves along the cliffs. Nothing turned up, no signs of struggle, no ransom notes, just vanished one by one, according to a report filed by Constable Roger Lunsford. Since deceased, suspicion briefly turned to the Delmars. The twins hadn't been seen publicly in nearly 2 years, and their household, secluded and near one of the mine entrances, was deemed of potential investigative interest. But when officers visited, they found no evidence of the children's presence. Eleanor told them the twins had been sent abroad for special schooling. She even provided a letter, allegedly from a boarding facility in Germany. The letter was never verified. The stationery bore no school crest. The address didn't exist. The investigation moved on, but in the margins of the report, written in faded blue pen, Lunsford added a note. Twins' room locked from the outside. Smells of wet ash. Found a doll made of teeth. Don't mention it. I found that same doll. Earlier this year, after Eleanor's death, the Delmar house was set to be auctioned. As the eldest surviving family member, I was asked to clear the personal effects. The house had been untouched since her passing. In a trunk beneath the floorboards of the nursery, buried under old quilts and broken toys, I found the doll. It was made of cloth, roughly stitched, but its eyes and mouth were real teeth. Not plastic, human. In the same trunk was a cassette tape, unlabeled. I played it on an old recorder in the attic. The tape lasts 7 minutes. It begins with static. Then, faint voices, children's voices, singing. Not a tune I recognized. The syllables are sharp-cutting, but repetitive, rhythmic. Then silence, and breathing. And finally a woman's voice, whispering. We gave them what they wanted. They weren't ever ours. Dr. Catherine Mullins, a child psychologist specializing in twin language phenomena, listened to the tape. This isn't cryptophasia, she said. That's typically playful, spontaneous, often with mixed syntax from native language. This is structured, formal. It sounds ceremonial. When I asked what kind of ceremony, she hesitated. Ritual. It has all the cadence of invocation. The breaking point came on March 2, 1978. At 20:17 a.m. neighbors reported a sound like distant thunder followed by the shrieking of birds. The sky, several said, looked wrong, a reddish tint unnatural for the hour. Eleanor was seen outside the Delmar house, standing in the garden barefoot, her arms raised. By morning, the twins were gone. There was no sign of struggle, no footprints in or out of their room, no broken glass. Their beds were undisturbed. And yet, Eleanor told the responding officer, they've returned. When asked what she meant, she repeated, they were never meant to stay. They weren't born. They came through. She was taken into psychiatric care the next day, held under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act. No charges were ever filed. She was released quietly in June of that year and returned to her home, where she lived until her death in 2024. The twins were never found. The missing children from Corrimere were never found. The case was quietly closed in 1980. Due to lack of leads and confirmed evidence. But the town never forgot, and neither did I. I once asked my grandmother why the nursery door had a lock on the outside. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, and said, to keep us safe. I asked, from what? She answered, from what they brought with them. As I sit in the house where the silence feels heavier than ever, I realize something she never said aloud. But meant the twins didn't just vanish. They were taken back. The town of Corrimere never held a memorial for the missing children. No plaques. No dates engraved on the church walls. Only 5 empty pews at St. Michael's each Christmas, left untouched by families who stopped attending altogether. In the decades that followed, explanations came and went like coastal fog. Some blamed a predator who fled. Others pointed to the sea, suggesting the tides might have claimed them in some unspoken tragedy. But for those who remembered the weeks leading up to their disappearance, the strange lights on the moor, the children whispering in languages no adult could decipher, the smell of burning roots in the air, there was always a deeper suspicion, one rooted not in the rational, but in something much older, something the Delmars had let back in. I wasn't the only one asking questions. After my first visit to the Delmar house in 2024, word spread through what remained of the old Corrimere families. Some were angry, some afraid. But one reached out, Miriam Goss, the daughter of Judith Goss, the Delmars' housemaid for nearly 20 years. Miriam had been a teenager in the 1970s and still lived in Corrimere, in a small cottage near the edge of Langridge Forest. When I met her, she brought out a shoebox sealed with black ribbon. Inside were fragments of Judith's personal diary, torn pages, most singed at the edges. One entry read, "They don't bleed." I saw Jacob fall down the stone stair. He hit his head, but there was no mark. He laughed, then whispered something to the old cupboard, and it opened on its own. "I've told Eleanor," she says. "It's part of the gift. I am not sleeping in that house anymore." Another, dated the week before the disappearances, were they stand at the edge of the woods now. The twins and the other children. No shoes, no coats, singing in the dark. Something watches them from inside the trees. I think they've invited it. Has Miriam looked at me after I finished reading. "They say Mum had a breakdown," she said. "But I think she saw something real." Judith left Corrimere in 1979. She died in a care home outside Bristol 10 years later, never speaking of what she'd witnessed again. I went back to the woods. Langridge Forest stretches along the northern edge of Corrimere like a dark spine. Once a sacred grove, it was later used as grazing land, then abandoned altogether after the livestock started disappearing in the 1950s. There are stone formations deep inside the thickets, circular clearings, lichen, covered markers that date back before the Doomsday Book. Some locals call it the boundary. Others don't call it anything at all. I found a trail that hadn't been walked in years, overgrown with brambles and silence. 20 minutes in, I reached a clearing. In the center, a large, flat stone like a table, blackened at the edges. On the stone, carved crudely but unmistakably, were two mirrored figures, arms raised, heads bowed, and something above them, a shape with many arms, or wings, or both. I took a photograph and left quickly. When I developed the image later, I noticed something I hadn't seen at the time. In the far background, nearly swallowed by shadow, were two small silhouettes, child-sized. I brought the image to Dr. Felix Warrender, a historian of esoteric British cults and forgotten folk practices at Durham University. He looked at the stonework and immediately grew pale. "This is older than Saxon," he said. "This is pre-Roman, possibly Bronze Age." He flipped through his reference materials until he found a charcoal rubbing from 1912, made by a folklorist named Thomas Letchford in Northumberland. The carving was nearly identical. Letchford believed it to be tied to the so-called Moro twins, a mythological pair of children said to speak the language of the sky and the soil. They were believed to be messengers, or vessels, for something other. What kind of other? I'd asked. He hesitated. Not a god, not a demon. Something liminal, something that waits outside the circle of seasons and comes only when invited. He tapped the rubbing with a pen. "These figures, the arms raised, that's an offering pose. But the twins are facing outward. That's not worship, that's warning." I began reviewing records from nearby towns. In 1893, 3 children vanished from the village of Thornley. In 1921, 2 siblings disappeared during the harvest fair in Malgrave. In both cases, locals reported strange behavior in the weeks prior, dreams of mirrored children, animal carcasses arranged in spirals, and a persistent sound like water dripping inside stone even when there was no rain. Each incident occurred within 30 miles of Langridge Forest. Each family had roots in Corrimere. Each had twins. Back at the Delmar house, I began combing through the cellar, where the stone walls were visibly older than the rest of the foundation. Behind a row of rusted gardening tools, I found another door, low and narrow, concealed behind rotting boards, no keyhole, just a brass ring. It led to a chamber I'd never known existed. Dirt floor, arched ceiling, and carved into the walls circles, symbols, and 2 vertical slashes positioned side by side like tallies or twins. In the center sat a small wooden stool. Beside it, 2 child-sized chairs facing each other. Everything in the room reeked of salt and old ash. In a sealed envelope tucked into Eleanor's will, found only after probate, was a final letter addressed to the next of blood. It read, "They never cried. Not once. From birth they knew more than we taught. They came to me in dreams long before they were conceived. I was chosen to receive them, not to raise them. We tried to keep them hidden, but the old cycle returned. It always does. Every few generations, the hillfolk demand return. The twins are not ours. They never were. We don't speak of them because names are keys, and they are not to be called back. If you find this, burn the nursery, salt the roots, and never go into the woods in spring." The letter was signed, not with a name, but a symbol, 2 lines side by side, identical, eternal. I interviewed Elizabeth Rowe, the last living child of the 5 that disappeared in 1978, though she hadn't been taken. She was the 6th. Her name had been on the original list of missing children until, according to records, she was found a week later wandering near the sea cliffs. Her family left town that same year. She now lives in Brighton, under a different surname. She agreed to speak anonymously. "I don't remember much," she said. "Just pieces. Singing. Mud. Being cold." I asked if she remembered the other children. She nodded. They were with the twins. The girl held my hand. Her eyes were black. Not evil, just empty. Like a mirror. She looked at me, then away. She said, "Not you. Not this time." Then everything went dark. In spring of 2025, 3 children from a nearby village reported hearing voices in the forest. A search party found nothing, but one officer noted that in the clearing someone had recently cleared the moss from the stone table. A bouquet of blackthorn had been left in the center, 2 blossoms, twined together. The investigation was closed without further action, but I keep thinking about what my grandmother wrote in her final letter, "The cycle returns." This wasn't just a story about lost children or a family tragedy. It was a pattern, one that repeats quietly, without headlines, without funerals, one that moves through generations like a shadow moving beneath water. And once you know it's real, you start to see the signs everywhere, the twin carvings, the mirrored names, the places where no birds nest. I thought this story ended with my family, but maybe we were just one chapter, and something ancient, hungry, and waiting, is still writing the rest. In April of this year, after releasing a limited podcast about the Delmar twins and Corrimere's history, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, with a slight Lancashire accent. He said, "I was at the Hill School in 75. Boarding. 4 of us knew about the twins. They visited once. A van dropped them off at night. No uniforms, no luggage. They didn't sleep. They only whispered to each other. We called them the Echoes. When they left, a boy in my dorm vanished. They said he ran away. But his bed was still warm and his shoes were under it. The message cut off after that. No name, no return number, but it was enough to track down the school. The Hill School for Gifted and Sensitive Children was a private institution that operated from 1961 to 1983, nestled in the hills above Kendall. Originally founded as a therapeutic learning center for children, unsuited to mainstream education, the school attracted a strange reputation over the years. Unusual curricula, heavy involvement in dream analysis, and a handful of unexplained incidents that were quietly kept out of the press. I was granted access to the school's archives, now held in storage by the Cumbria Historical Education Society. In a box marked Animelus Cassis, I found a folder dated March 1975 labeled Visitors, Unregistered, None Enrolled. Inside were 2 Polaroids, blurry, grainy, taken at night, a boy and a girl, standing outside the school gates. The girl's head is turned slightly as though she's looking directly at the camera. Her expression is blank. Behind them, the van's license plate is obscured. A note scribbled on the back of one photo reads, "Arrived with no papers. Spoke a dialect no staff could identify. Not listed in records. Removed without formal withdrawal." The file included one incident report, written by Headmaster Ronald Eerily. Child in dormitory B missing as of morning inspection. No forced entry. Bed undisturbed. Other students report dreams of twin voices whispering beneath the floorboards. Counselor Wallace to investigate potential mass hysteria. There was no follow-up. No missing persons report filed. Just silence. I tracked down Counselor Wallace. Full name Daniel Wallace, now retired and living in a quiet coastal town near Whitby. When I arrived at his cottage, he was already waiting at the door as though he'd known I was coming. I figured someone would come. Eventually, he said. He poured with shaking hands. I saw them, he said. The twins, they were beautiful, and wrong. He told me the girl, Imogen, never blinked, that she would sit still for hours, lips moving silently. The boy, Jacob, didn't speak at all, but one night Wallace saw him crouched in the hallway, carving symbols into the wood with a fork. I confronted Eleanor Delmar, Wallace said. She came to collect them herself, drove through the night. I asked her what they were. Not a who. What? He sipped his tea. She said, they come when the roots grow deep enough. And they leave when we forget the old names. Then he leaned forward and whispered something I won't forget. Corrimere was never meant to raise children. It was meant to feed them. Back in the Delmar nursery, I found a small panel behind the bookshelf. It opened into a cavity barely wide enough to crawl through, like an air vent. At the far end, behind cobwebs and dead insects, was a wall etched with hundreds of tiny vertical lines, scores, or tallies. In the center, written in charcoal, "Let us in again." That night, I didn't sleep. The dreams came. Whispers first, then singing, then the woods. And in the clearing, 2 small figures holding hands. They turned toward me, and both had my face. I shared the dream with a sleep psychologist I've worked with before, Eleanor Haskins. She ran a hypnagogic regression session, curious whether the imagery was symbolic or simply stress-induced. What she found startled her. "You repeated a phrase while you were under," she said. "You said it 11 times. She handed me the transcription. The phrase was, "Dragon tween. Ours in root, not wum." Return the likeness. It was not a known language, but when we ran the phonetics through comparative dialectal software, one sequence showed partial matches with a reconstructed Proto-Brittonic tongue, dated roughly 600 BCE. The translation, "Carry the twins. Ours by blood deeper than birth, give them back." 3 days later, I received a package in the post. No return address. Inside, an aged VHS tape wrapped in black linen. On the tape, handwritten in smudged marker, "Teach faux orchtude." I had the contents digitized. The footage begins with handheld film of Corrimere's coastline. Judging by the quality, the footage is from the late 70s. Then a group of robed figures, walking in single file down toward a sea cave known locally as the Hollow Gate. Among them are 2 children, barefoot, identical clothing. As they approach the cave, the camera shakes. One of the children turns. It's Jacob. He looks directly at the lens and smiles. Then, in unison, the group begins to chant. The camera dips. Darkness. Then static. But beneath the static, layered in low frequency, the audio tech found something else. A heartbeat. 2, actually. Not synced, like the recording picked up the pulses of 2 bodies from inside the tape, as if it hadn't just recorded an event, but something living. Corrimere's town records from 1979 list a local ordinance change, closure of Hollow Gate sea access. The reason given, structural instability. But a leaked council memo, found among Eleanor Delmar's personal correspondence, reveals another reason. The document is brief. Dated March 11, 1979, following the incident at Hollow Gate. Access is hereby restricted indefinitely. No civilian parties permitted beyond drowning line. Do not disturb or remove markings. Sealing is not advised. Let erosion handle it. What happened in that cave was never explained. But they didn't try to hide it either. They just let time wash it away. That would have been the end of the trail, if not for a single line I found in Eleanor's final notebook, one that hadn't been transcribed by archivists, likely due to its cryptic nature. It simply read, "We gave them the children so ours could grow." That one sentence reframed everything. The disappearances, the Delmar's power in the town, the silence that followed. Corrimere didn't lose children by accident. It was part of the deal. In June 2025, I met with a former member of the town council. He asked to remain anonymous. We sat in his garden, surrounded by salt-stained stone planters. He didn't look surprised when I brought up the twins. "You think it's just your family," he said. "But it isn't. It's the land. The soil remembers." He pointed to the sea. "Everything here was built on surrender. The sea takes, the land takes, and we give, quietly, with names scratched off school lists and birthdays forgotten." He looked at me hard. "You want the truth. We don't speak of the twins, because speaking might bring them back." He stood, and I thought the conversation was over. But as he walked away, he turned back and said they were never children. They were warnings. I returned to the nursery one last time. As I opened the door, I smelled it again. Not mold, not decay, but wet moss and sea air. On the windowsill, undisturbed since my last visit, sat 2 dead birds, their necks twisted in the same direction, facing the sea. I didn't place them there. I don't know who or what did, but I know what they meant. The cycle had stirred again, and something was watching. I left Corrimere that same night. The road out of town winds through the hills like a scar, barely wide enough for 2 cars. I drove in silence, headlights cutting through mist, trying not to look at the trees. Every time the branches leaned over the road, I felt the same sensation, like being watched by something behind bark and bone. Something that knew I was leaving, and did not approve. I didn't stop driving until dawn, when I reached the outskirts of Newcastle. I rented a small flat, paid in cash, and avoided mirrors for weeks. But you can't escape something that was written into you, because the truth I hadn't wanted to admit, not even to myself, had been slowly unfurling since that first day in the Delmar nursery. This wasn't just a family story, it was an inheritance, and it was never finished. In August, I was contacted by Dr. Caroline Voss, a linguist and cryptographer working with a university team studying undocumented ritual languages in the British Isles. She'd heard the podcast. Someone had sent her the audio tape, the one with the twins singing. She told me she and her team had isolated several repeating motifs in the children's speech, phonemic fragments, she called them. Ancient but not random. "It's not a language," she said. "It's a command structure. Vocal triggers, almost like a musical key that unlocks emotional or psychic states." Then she paused, and her voice changed. "There's something else," she said. "These aren't just incantations, they're instructions." She forwarded a visual rendering of the pattern. At the center of the spectrogram, the frequency lines curved inward, symmetrical, mirrored, shaped like twins. That same week, I received a letter. Real ink, heavy paper, no return address. Just a note inside written in tight cursive: "You've opened the door. Now close it, or more will follow." Underneath, a photocopy of an article from the Millfield Gazette, dated October 11, 1960, 3 children missing near Corrimere. Last seen near old boundary stones. There was a photo, grainy and barely visible but clear enough. In the background, near the edge of the woods, stood 2 small figures. One boy, one girl. They were not the missing children. They were watching. I dug deeper into the local archives, back even further than I had before. 19th century parish records, unsanctioned journals kept by early Methodist ministers, and beneath them, a collection of transcribed oral histories from the early 1700s, mostly dismissed by scholars as hysteria or folklore. One, however, stood out, a testimony given by a dying farmer named Aldred Piles in 1730. "They come in tween, they talk in circle word, they feed on echoes and grief. The lady beneath the roots sends them when the pact is due, always twins, always from within. They look like ours, but they are not." Xerxes ends with a warning: "Do not name them, do not mirror them, and never speak the song aloud." It was then that I realized the silence in Corrimere wasn't fear. It was protection, a kind of ritual passed down like prayer. Not speaking of the twins wasn't denial, it was containment, and I had broken it. In mid-September, local authorities found a dead fox on the steps of the Delmar house, gutted but not eaten, arranged with its limbs outstretched, its eyes replaced with small white stones. Inside its open mouth, a small card soaked in blood, scrawled in childlike handwriting: "S1 back. One remains." I was notified because my name was written on the back of the card, in charcoal, not ink. I returned one final time to the forest near Langridge. Alone, I followed the same path, past the same twisted trees. When I reached the clearing, the central stone was cracked clean down the middle, something I hadn't seen before. And where the carving had once shown the 2 twins offering upward, the figures had been violently scratched out. But behind the stone, embedded in the soft earth, was something new. A mirror. Small, circular, antique, just sitting there in the moss, reflecting nothing but sky. When I reached down to pick it up, the air turned cold. Not breeze cold, grave, cold. And from behind me, I heard two small voices speak in perfect unison. We remember your name. There's no shame in running. Not when your blood turns to iron. Not when every part of you knows that staying means becoming. I left the mirror in the dirt, and I did not look back. Since then, I've tried to sever all ties to the Delmars. I've burned every document I brought back from the house, deleted every backup file, left the house to rot, but the dreams haven't stopped. They're stronger now. In every one, the same scene plays out. I'm in the nursery. The walls breathe. The rocking chair moves on its own. The floor opens like a mouth, and from it climb two children. Not aged, not decayed, timeless, and they speak not to me but through me. My voice, their words. Every night I wake up repeating the same phrase: give us form, give us breath, give us mirror. Yet I contacted Dr. Voss again, desperate for something, anything, that could explain how to stop this. She was quiet for a long time, then said, there's a theory. Some rituals can't be undone, only passed forward, like a burden or a flame. The only way to sever it is to offer the line to something else. I asked what that meant. She didn't answer, but she sent one final message, a scanned page from an anonymous grimoire found in Devon, dated 1892, a crude drawing of two children, faces empty, standing beside a woman asleep in bed. Underneath, a single sentence: they need a house, a womb, a name. The legal status of the Corrimere disappearances remains closed. No official reopening, no further investigations, just the occasional vandalism, the occasional whisper. Towns like Corrimere don't survive by solving their darkness. They survive by outlasting it. But I've since come to believe that not all stories ask for justice. Some ask only for silence. And I understand now why my grandmother locked that door from the outside. Because the twins didn't vanish, they were given. And in return, the town got its harvest, its seasons, its relative peace. Until someone asked why. Until someone spoke. Until someone named them. If you hear them, at night, in dream, or between waking, don't answer. Don't speak their names. Don't mirror their voices. Because once you do, they remember. And they come. Not out of malice, not for revenge, but because you've invited them. And now, like the sea, they won't leave until they've taken something back. Or someone.